The security footage from Giordano's that night was supposed to be confiscated, but someone always keeps a copy. When 7 contract killers walked through the mahogany doors of Chicago's most exclusive Italian restaurant, they believed their target, Luca Marchetti, the untouchable don of the Marchetti crime family, was cornered. They had studied his patterns. They had brought enough firepower for a small war. They had synchronized their attack to the second. What they didn't factor into their careful planning was the girl carrying tiramisu to table 12. To them, she was just a waitress, a college kid in a cheap uniform trying to make rent. They miscalculated. 23 seconds later, sirens wailed outside as paramedics loaded 7 unconscious men into ambulances, and Luca Marchetti sat untouched in his corner booth, staring at the slight figure standing over his would-be assassins. This is the story of Haley Thompson, the woman who didn't just serve dinner that night, she served justice with her bare hands. The winter wind rattled the tall windows of Giordano's, Chicago's premier destination for power brokers, politicians, and those who preferred their business discussions away from recording devices. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with the scent of garlic, expensive Barolo, and the kind of wealth that never needs to prove itself. Haley Thompson tugged at her white apron, the motion unconscious, instinctive. The fabric pulled slightly against the network of scars across her knuckles, reminders of fights in basement rings where blood soaked into concrete and nobody asked your name. That was 2 years ago, back when she was the Reaper, the underground circuit's youngest champion. Back when she broke bones for money to pay her mother's medical bills. Now she wasn't a fighter. She was just Haley, a college sophomore with a 3.8 gigapascals in student loans that made her nauseous. She balanced plates of osso buco and smiled when businessmen talked through her like she wasn't there. She refilled wine glasses for men who spent more on a single bottle than she made in a month. She was invisible, exactly how she needed to be. Table 7 needs fresh pepper. Marco, the floor manager, hissed as he passed, his cologne aggressive enough to kill the aroma of the carbonara she was carrying. Haley nodded, her eyes tracking the dining room with the efficiency of someone trained to notice details others missed. Table 7. Luca Marchetti, the name that made Chicago's underworld flinch. Her mother cleaned his family's Kenilworth estate every Tuesday and Friday, came home with stories of marble floors and artwork worth more than houses. Haley had never seen him in person until tonight. Dark eyes that missed nothing. A suit that probably cost more than her entire education. The kind of dangerous stillness that came from never needing to prove you were the most lethal person in any room. She approached with the pepper mill, professional smile fixed in place, when the front doors exploded inward. 7 men, masks, guns drawn, moving with military precision toward table 7. Time fractured into crystalline slow motion. The first man's weapon was rising, finger tightening on the trigger, when Haley's body remembered what her mind had tried to forget. The pepper mill became a weapon swung hard into his temple. He dropped. The dessert tray from table 6 became a shield as she dove between Marchetti and the second shooter. Her legs swept out, Brazilian jiu-jitsu technique as natural as breathing, taking out the third man's knee with a sickening crack. Chaos erupted, screaming, tables overturning. But Haley moved through it like water, finding its path, redirecting momentum, exploiting angles, turning their size and weapons against them. Wrist lock, disarm, throat strike, 7 opponents. Muscle memory and 2 years of underground brutality taking over completely. When silence finally descended, broken only by groaning and the distant wail of approaching sirens, Haley stood in the center of carnage she'd created, breathing hard, split knuckles, bleeding onto the marble floor she'd just destroyed 7 trained killers on. Luca Marchetti sat untouched in his booth, blood splatter across his expensive suit, dark eyes locked on her with an intensity that made her stomach drop. He saw what she was, what she'd tried so desperately to stop being. Who are you? His voice was controlled. Curious, dangerous. Haley's hands started shaking, adrenaline fading into horror. Her carefully constructed normal life college anonymity, pretending she was just another struggling student, had just shattered in 23 seconds of violence she couldn't take back. Nobody, she whispered, backing toward the kitchen. I'm nobody. But they both knew that was a lie. And as Luca Marchetti's calculating gaze tracked her retreat, memorizing every detail of her face, Haley realized with sinking certainty that her invisible life had just ended. The most dangerous man in Chicago, now knew exactly who and what she was. He would never forget. And she would never be nobody again. Real quick, if you love stories about ordinary people with extraordinary secrets, you're in the right place. This channel is all about complex characters making impossible choices. Subscribe if you want more stories like Haley's, and drop a comment telling me, would you have saved him, knowing what it would cost? All right, let's see what happens next. The bruises on Haley's knuckles had turned a spectacular purple-yellow by morning. Impossible to hide even with the oversized hoodie, she'd pulled over her waitress uniform before stuffing it in the dumpster behind her apartment at 3 a.m. Now, sitting in the back row of Professor Chen's macroeconomics lecture, she kept her hands tucked under the desk, trying to focus on supply curves and market equilibrium. While her phone buzzed with news alerts, she couldn't stop checking. 7 arrested in Giordano's attack Marchetti unharmed. Mysterious assault leaves hitman hospitalized. Sources say contract killers neutralized by unknown individual. Unknown. She clung to that word like a lifeline. The restaurant's security system had been disabled by the attackers. No footage. No witnesses willing to talk to police about what happened inside a room where Luca Marchetti dined. She'd slipped out through the kitchen, disappeared into Chicago's winter night before the sirens arrived. Nobody knew. She was safe. She almost believed it until she walked out of the economics building 2 hours later and saw the black SUV idling at the curb. Not a campus security vehicle. Not a rideshare. A Mercedes S-Class with windows tinted dark enough to be illegal, and a driver built like he ate protein powder for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. He stepped out as she passed, his movement deliberate, blocking her path without touching her. Miss Thompson, Mr. Marchetti requests a conversation. Haley's heart hammered against her ribs. She adjusted her backpack, buying time. I don't know any Mr. Marchetti. He's quite insistent. The driver's expression remained neutral, professional, not threatening, just immovable. I'll wait. I have class. I have time. She did have class statistical methods at 3. She went. The SUV was still there when she emerged at 4:30. Still there at 6 when her study group broke up. Still there at 8:45 when she finally admitted defeat and approached the passenger window. It lowered silently. The driver handed her a business card. Catalyst Coffee, 9 p.m. Or I continue waiting. Your choice, miss. Thompson. Catalyst was neutral ground, a 24-hour place near campus where broke students nursed single espressos for hours, and nobody looked twice at unusual meetings. Haley arrived at 9:15, a petty rebellion that felt pathetic the moment she walked in and saw him. Luca Marchetti sat in the back corner booth, somehow making a simple black sweater and dark jeans look like they cost more than her tuition. Without the formal dining room atmosphere, without the blood and chaos, he looked different. Younger than she'd thought, maybe early 30s. But his eyes held that same unsettling intensity, tracking her approach with the focus of someone who'd learned to notice everything. You made me wait, he said as she slid into the opposite seat, keeping the table between them. That took courage or stupidity. I haven't decided which. I don't want anything from you. Haley kept her voice low, controlled. Last night never happened. We never met. I'm just a student trying to graduate. Haley Marie Thompson. His voice was conversational, like he was commenting on the weather. 19. Economics major. Pre-law track. 3.8 gigapascals. Part-time employment at Giordano's for 8 months prior to last night's incident. He paused, letting that sink in. Juvenile arrest record. Sealed. Underground fighting circuit from age 15 to 17, under the name Reaper. 32 documented fights, 30 wins, 2 losses, both by decision, never by knockout. The blood drained from Haley's face. You had no right. Your mother, Aaliyah Thompson, has worked in my household for 6 years. Impeccable references. I pay her well. His expression didn't change, but the implicit threat was crystal clear. I could destroy your college career with a single phone call. End your mother's employment before breakfast. Have your juvenile record unsealed and leaked to every law school you'll apply to. Haley's hands clenched under the table, nails digging into her palms. Is that what this is? Blackmail? No. Luca leaned forward slightly. It's gratitude. You saved my life without hesitation, without knowing who I was, without asking for anything in return. That's rare in my world. So name your price. Tuition? Your mother's mortgage paid off? A career after graduation? Whatever you want. I want you to forget I exist. He studied her like she was a puzzle with pieces that didn't fit conventional patterns. The Moretti family won't forget. You interfered in a contracted hit. That makes you a complication they'll want resolved. I can handle myself. The words came out harder than she intended. His smile was slight, genuine, and somehow more frightening than anger would have been. I watched you dismantle 7 trained killers in under 30 seconds. I don't doubt your capabilities. He paused, letting silence stretch thin. But tell me, Haley, can your mother handle herself when they come asking questions about her daughter? The world tilted sideways. Haley's breath caught in her throat as the implications crashed over her. She hadn't just exposed herself last night. She'd painted a target on the one person she'd spent years trying to protect. What do you want from me? The question came out barely above a whisper. Luca Marchetti's dark eyes held something that might have been sympathy, or might have been the look of a predator who just watched his prey realize the cage door had closed. Right now? Just for you to understand that, whether you like it or not, you're involved. And the only question that matters is whether you face what's coming alone. He stood, pulling out his wallet and leaving a $50 bill for the coffee neither of them had touched. Or with someone who understands exactly how dangerous the game has become. He left her sitting there, the business card he'd slid across the table burning like accusation under her fingertips. While outside the window, Chicago's winter night pressed dark and full of watching eyes. For 3 days, Haley pretended the world hadn't shifted on its axis. She went to classes, took notes on fiscal policy and market structures, ignored the business card that lived in her jacket pocket like a splinter working its way towards something vital. She told herself that Luca Marchetti's warning was just intimidation, that the Moretti family had bigger concerns than one college student who'd gotten lucky. She believed it right up until she unlocked her apartment door Thursday afternoon and found her life destroyed. The place had been systematically torn apart, couch cushions slashed open, textbooks scattered like broken wings, her laptop smashed on the kitchen floor. But it was the message spray-painted across her bedroom wall in dripping red letters that made her blood turn to ice. Stay out of Marchetti business. Campus security took a report with the enthusiasm of people filling out insurance paperwork. Probably just a break-in. You'd be surprised how common this is. The officer didn't even look up from his clipboard. We'll increase patrols in the area. Haley stood in the wreckage of her apartment after they left, hands shaking as she pulled out the business card she'd sworn she wouldn't use. The phone rang twice before his voice came through, steady and unsurprised, like he'd been waiting for this call. They found you? My apartment. Her voice cracked despite her best efforts. They. Address. Now. He arrived 20 minutes later with 4 men in dark suits who moved through her destroyed home with professional efficiency. Checking corners and photographing evidence campus security had deemed irrelevant. Luca stood in her bedroom doorway, studying the spray-painted threat with an expression so controlled it was terrifying. You'll stay at one of my properties. Not a question, not a request. Secure location. 24-hour protection. Until this is resolved. No. Haley forced steel into her voice. I'm not abandoning my life because some thugs tried to scare me. His jaw tightened. This isn't negotiable. Watch me negotiate. She pushed past him, grabbing her undamaged backpack. I have a microeconomics exam tomorrow. I'm not letting them take that from me. She left before he could argue, before his cold logic could override her desperate need to believe she still controlled something in her rapidly disintegrating world. The library was nearly empty at 9 p.m., just scattered students hunched over laptops in the fluorescent-lit silence. Haley had claimed her usual corner desk, trying to focus on supply and demand curves, while her peripheral vision tracked every shadow, every movement. She lasted 2 hours before admitting she'd absorbed exactly nothing, her textbook's words sliding off her brain like water off glass. The winter air bit through her jacket as she cut across the dark quad toward her apartment. She noticed them at the halfway point, 2 men, too coordinated in their casual approach, boxing her in with practiced ease. They moved fast. Professional. The first grabbed her arm, while the second went for her other side, trying to herd her toward the idling sedan at the curb. Abduction, not assassination. They wanted her alive. Haley's body responded on instinct elbow strike to the first man's solar plexus, heel stomp to the second's instep. But they'd studied her footage. anticipated her moves. The first absorbed the hit and maintained his grip. The second produced zip ties. She was fighting, really fighting. Adrenaline screaming through her veins, but they were bigger, trained, working in perfect synchronization. She was losing. Then headlights flooded the quad and Luca's people materialized from the darkness like avenging shadows. The abduction attempt collapsed into chaos, her attackers retreating toward their vehicle, Luca's men giving chase. Strong hands caught Haley as her knees buckled, guided her into the back of the Mercedes, where Luca waited with an expression that could freeze hell. Inside. Now. She collapsed onto the leather seat, shaking with rage and fear, and the horrible understanding that he'd been right. The door closed, muting the outside world. In the sudden silence, everything she'd been holding back erupted. I saved your life. Her voice broke on the words. I risked everything, and this is what I get? My home destroyed? Men trying to abduct me outside my own campus? Luca's jaw worked, something like pain flashing across his carefully controlled features. This is what you get for being extraordinary when it would have been safer to be invisible. He leaned forward, dark eyes holding hers with uncomfortable intensity. I'm sorry, truly, but you saved my life, which means your life is now my responsibility, and I'm going to protect you whether you like it or not. I don't need. Yes, you do. His voice was quiet, absolute. Because the Moretti family doesn't take prisoners, Haley. They take examples. And right now, you're the example they want to make. The car pulled away from campus, carrying her toward a future she'd never chosen, and Haley watched her normal life disappear in the rearview mirror, like smoke dissipating into Chicago's cold night air. The guest house was ridiculous, all marble countertops and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Luca's Kenilworth estate, furniture that probably cost more than Haley's entire college education. Her small bedroom in the shared apartment near campus could have fit in the bathroom 3 times over. It was beautiful, suffocating. A gilded cage with a security system that tracked her every movement. She'd been there 2 days when her mother arrived, and Haley knew immediately that the confrontation would be ugly. Aaliyah Thompson had cleaned the Marchetti estate every Tuesday and Friday for 6 years, invisible in the way domestic workers learn to be. But there was nothing invisible about her now as she stood in Luca's study, all 5'3" of righteous maternal fury, still wearing her cleaning uniform. She's 19 years old. Aaliyah's voice shook, but didn't break. She's not part of your world, Mr. Marchetti. She's a college student who made a mistake getting involved. Luca stood behind his desk, and Haley watched something like respect flicker across his features. Most people didn't challenge him. Certainly not people who depended on his paycheck. Your daughter saved my life, Mrs. Thompson. That made her part of my world, whether either of us wanted it. His voice was measured, careful. The Moretti family won't differentiate between willing and unwilling involvement. I'm trying to keep her alive. Aaliyah turned to Haley, and the disappointment in her eyes was worse than any anger. This is exactly what I worked to prevent. Every double shift, every humiliation I swallowed cleaning houses, it was so you could have a normal life. College, a career, not this. Mom, Haley started, but the words stuck in her throat. Do you know what I sacrificed? Aaliyah's voice cracked. What I gave up so you could be safe? I've never been normal. The admission came out harsh, desperate. Not since I was 15 and started fighting in basements for money because your insurance wouldn't cover the treatments you needed. I'm not the daughter you think I am. I never was. The silence that followed was devastating. Aaliyah left without another word, and Haley stood in the opulent study, feeling like she'd just burned down the last bridge to the life she'd been pretending to live. Hey, quick pause. Can I be real with you for a second? If you're enjoying this video so far, I need your help. I'm trying to reach 1,000 subscribers before the year ends. And I'm not going to lie, every single subscription matters to me right now. It's not just a number. It's proof that what I'm creating is actually reaching people and making a difference. So if this content is adding value to your day, if you're finding it helpful or entertaining, please take 2 seconds and hit that subscribe button. It would genuinely mean the world to me. All right, let's get back to it. She found the gym at midnight, unable to sleep in the too soft bed, her mind replaying her mother's face on endless loop. The private facility was state-of-the-art heavy bags, weight equipment, a full boxing ring that probably cost more than most people's cars. Haley wrapped her hands with methodical precision and lost herself in violence, Each strike against the leather bag a punctuation mark to thoughts she couldn't articulate. She didn't hear him enter. Didn't realize she had an audience until she finally stopped, breathing hard, knuckles aching, and found Luca leaning against the doorframe watching her with an expression she couldn't read. "How long have you been there?" "Long enough." He moved into the room, circling the heavy bag she'd been punishing. "You fight angry. That's dangerous." "I fight how I was taught." Haley unwrapped her hands, suddenly self-conscious. "Underground circuit doesn't reward pretty technique. Tell me about it." "Not a command, an invitation." So she did. The words came easier in the dim light, with exhaustion lowering her defenses. She told him about being 15 and desperate, about her mother's lupus flare that insurance called pre-existing, about the medical bills that mounted like accusation, about Marco finding her at the gym where she'd been training in Brazilian jiu-jitsu since she was 12, seeing potential that could be monetized. 2 years, she said quietly. 32 fights in basements and warehouses. I was good. Really good. Made enough to cover Mom's treatments, keep us afloat. But the violence. She stopped, unable to articulate what it had cost. I got out at 17, sealed the record, tried to bury who I'd been. Luca was silent for a long moment, his dark eyes holding hers with uncomfortable understanding. I was 22 when my father was killed, second year at Northwestern, studying business, pretending I could escape this life. His voice was carefully controlled. 300 families depend on Marchetti operations for income, legitimate businesses, most of them. But someone had to hold the empire together. Someone had to be what my father was. You didn't want this. Neither did you. He moved closer, and Haley's breath caught at the recognition in his expression. We're both trapped by circumstances, both doing what's necessary to protect the people we love, both pretending we're something we're not. The air between them felt charged, dangerous. Haley saw the exact moment the professional distance Luca maintained so carefully began to crack, saw something raw and human underneath the controlled facade. "This is a bad idea," she whispered. "Terrible idea," he agreed. But neither of them moved away. The moment stretched, suspended between possibility and restraint, until Luca finally stepped back with visible effort. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow we start actual security training. If you're going to be in my world, you need to understand all its dangers." He left her standing in the gym, heart pounding, understanding with crystalline clarity that the greatest danger might not be the Moretti family at all. It might be the way Luca Marchetti looked at her, like she was something more than a problem to be solved, like she was someone worth knowing, worth protecting, worth the complications she brought crashing into his carefully controlled life. The security detail became routine after 3 weeks, two men in a black sedan trailing her to campus, waiting outside lecture halls, maintaining professional distance, while making it impossible for Haley to forget she was living in a different world now. Her classmates noticed, whispered. She stopped trying to explain. What surprised her was how naturally she slipped into Luca's orbit beyond just protection. It started with a casual question over breakfast about a commercial real estate contract he was reviewing, her economics major making her curious about the terms. Her analysis was sharp enough that he started asking for her perspective on other deals. Late nights in his study became their routine, him reviewing contracts, her highlighting potential issues he'd missed, both of them discovering that business strategy was safer territory than the dangerous awareness building between them. Except the conversations never stayed purely professional. She learned he loved opera, attended performances alone in private boxes because enjoying Puccini didn't fit the image people expected, that he donated anonymously to youth programs throughout Chicago, funding the kind of opportunities he'd never had growing up in his father's violent shadow, that beneath the controlled exterior lived someone achingly lonely, surrounded by people who feared or wanted something from him, never simply knowing him. He was fascinated by her normalcy, her dreams of graduating, opening a youth center, teaching girls that strength could be protection instead of violence. "You still believe in that?" he'd asked one night. "After everything you've seen?" "Especially after everything I've seen." The charity gala was strategic necessity, a public appearance demonstrating that Haley Thompson was under Marchetti protection, making her a liability rather than a target for rival families. The borrowed Valentino gown felt like costume, all black silk and strategic cutouts that cost more than her semester's tuition. Haley tugged at the fitted bodice, uncomfortable with the wealth on display, the way women dripped diamonds like armor and men measured worth in watch complications. Then Luca appeared at the top of his stairs, in a tuxedo that made her forget how to breathe, and his expression when he saw her raw appreciation, quickly masked, but not quickly enough, made every uncomfortable moment worth it. You look, he stopped, recalibrating. Beautiful. You look beautiful. The gala was performance art. Haley smiled through introductions to Chicago's elite, people who saw her as curiosity or threat, never simply as herself. But when Luca guided her onto the dance floor for the customary waltz, his hands settling at the small of her back, everything else faded into background noise. You're good at this, she said, surprised by his easy grace. My mother insisted on dance lessons, said even criminals should have culture. His dark eyes held hers, and the carefully maintained distance between them felt impossibly thin. She would have liked you. They moved together like they'd been doing this for years instead of minutes, the music swelling around them, and Haley felt the exact moment the performance became something else. His hand tightened at her waist, her breath caught. The space between them charged with everything they'd been carefully not acknowledging for weeks. His gaze dropped to her lips. She swayed closer, drawn by gravity or insanity. Mr. Marchetti, one of his men, materialized at his shoulder. Moretti's representative would like a word. The moment shattered. Luca's expression shuddered back to professional control, but his hand lingered at her waist for 3 heartbeats longer than necessary before he stepped away. Stay with Marco, he told her quietly. I'll be back. Haley watched him disappear into the crowd, her heart hammering, understanding with perfect clarity that they'd just crossed a line neither could uncross. The ride home was silent, tension thick enough to choke on. Luca walked her to the guest house door, started to say goodnight, and Haley's control finally broke. This is a terrible idea, she said, and kissed him. For one frozen second, he didn't respond. Then his hands came up to frame her face, and he kissed her back with the desperation of someone who'd been holding back too long. It was nothing like the controlled man she'd been circling for weeks. It was raw and hungry and perfect. He pulled away, breathing hard, forehead resting against hers. This is the worst idea either of us has ever had. You're 19. You technically work for me. Your mother would be devastated. I know. Haley's hands fisted in his tuxedo jacket. I know all the reasons this is wrong. Then why? Because I'm tired of doing what's safe. She looked up at him, seeing her own fear and want reflected in his dark eyes. I've spent 2 years pretending to be someone I'm not, being careful, being invisible, and it got me nowhere except more alone. His thumb brushed her cheekbone with devastating gentleness. I can't promise you normal, Haley. I can't give you the life you deserve. I don't want normal. The truth of it settled in her chest like coming home. I want real. I want you. He kissed her again, slower this time, like memorizing something precious and breakable. When he finally pulled away, his voice was rough. This changes everything. I know, Haley whispered against his mouth and pulled him inside. Now, I know what you're thinking, this is about to get complicated. And you're absolutely right. But here's the thing. If you're invested in seeing whether Haley and Luca cross the line they're both terrified of, make sure you're subscribed. Because what comes next? It's going to test everything they think they know about protection, control, and what it means to truly trust someone. Let's continue. They tried to be careful. Stolen kisses between her morning classes and his afternoon meetings, late nights in his study that stretched into early mornings, tangled in sheets that cost more than her former rent. Haley told herself they were being discreet, that the security team's knowing glances didn't matter, that they could exist in this suspended bubble indefinitely. The bubble burst on a Tuesday afternoon when Aaliyah arrived for her regular cleaning shift and found them in the kitchen. Luca's hands in Haley's hair, her body pressed against the marble counter, both too lost in each other to hear the door open. The sound Aaliyah made wasn't quite a gasp, wasn't quite a sob, just a wounded noise that made Haley jerk away from Luca like she'd been burned. Mom, don't. Aaliyah's voice shook with a devastation so visceral it felt physical. I cleaned his family's house on my hands and knees so you could have better than this. I worked doubles and swallowed my pride and sacrificed everything. Her voice broke. And you chose this? Him? Mrs. Thompson, Luca started, but Aaliyah rounded on him with fury that made him actually step back. You don't get to talk. You're 13 years older than her. You're her employer. You're She couldn't finish, just turned back to Haley with tears streaming down her face. Get your things. We're leaving. The Moretti thread is still. Haley began desperately. I don't care. Aaliyah was already moving toward the staff quarters, where she kept her belongings. I quit. We're done with this world. With him. The apartment Aaliyah found was smaller than their old place, farther from campus, with locks that felt flimsy after weeks of Luca's security systems. Haley lasted 3 days before the walls started closing in, not from claustrophobia, but from her mother's silent disappointment and the constant awareness that she was exposed, vulnerable, a target without protection. I'm going back, she said on the fourth morning. Aaliyah looked up from her coffee, something breaking behind her eyes. To him, to protection. Mom, the Moretti family doesn't just forget. You're choosing him over me. I'm choosing to stay alive. But they both knew it was more complicated than that, and the look on her mother's face as Haley packed her bag was something that would haunt her. She didn't make it back to Luca's estate. Marco found her first, appearing outside her economics lecture like a ghost from the past she'd tried to bury. He looked the same, gym-muscled, dead-eyed, wearing the smile of someone who enjoyed having leverage. Reaper. The old nickname made her skin crawl. Been a while. I'm not interested in whatever you're selling. Haley tried to walk past him, but he matched her stride with practiced ease. New tournament, underground, prize money that would make your college fund look like pocket change. His voice was casual, conversational. I've got buyers asking about you specifically. The prodigy who walked away. I said no. Thought you might. Marco pulled out his phone, and Haley's stomach dropped as she recognized the grainy footage her at 15, 16, 17, breaking bones in basement rings for money. Funny thing about the internet, videos never really disappear. Would be a shame if your college administration saw these. Scholarship requires good moral character, doesn't it? The world tilted sideways. You wouldn't. One fight, that's all. You win. I delete everything. You refuse. He shrugged. Well, there goes your degree, your scholarship, your whole respectable future. Haley told Luca that night in his study, watching his expression shift from concern to cold calculation to barely controlled rage. I'll handle Marco. His voice was flat, final. He'll be gone by morning. No. The word came out sharper than she intended. No more violence on my behalf. I'm not. This isn't how I want to solve problems. He's threatening your future, and I'll handle it my way. She stood, needing distance. I don't need you to eliminate every threat like I'm some helpless thing you collected. Luca's jaw tightened. That's not what this is. Isn't it? The frustration that had been building for weeks finally erupted. You make decisions about my security, my safety, my life, and I'm just supposed to be grateful? I'm not a possession, Luca. I never said you were. His voice rose to match hers. I'm trying to protect you from a world you don't understand. I understand it better than you think. I survived it before you, and I can survive it without you. The words came out cruel, calculated to wound. Maybe my mother was right. Maybe this was a mistake. The silence that followed was devastating. Luca's expression shuddered completely, professional distance slamming back into place like armor. If that's what you believe, then leave. His voice was controlled, empty. I won't stop you. Haley grabbed her bag with shaking hands, pride and fury and heartbreak warring in her chest. She made it to the door before her resolve wavered, but she didn't look back. Couldn't look back. Because if she saw his face, she'd stay, and she needed to prove to him, to her mother, to herself that she was more than someone who needed saving. The door closed behind her, with terrible finality, and Haley walked into the cold night understanding that sometimes choosing independence meant choosing to be alone. The apartment felt emptier than it should have, every shadow a reminder that Haley was alone by choice. 3 days of radio silence from Luca felt like 3 years. But she refused to break first. She'd handle Marco her way, find a solution that didn't involve more violence, prove she could navigate her own problems. Then her mother didn't answer her phone. For 6 hours straight, the panic started slow, a tightness in Haley's chest that built with each unanswered call. Aaliyah always answered. Always. By hour 7, Haley was calling hospitals, police stations, anyone who might have information, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold her phone. The envelope arrived at midnight, slipped under her apartment door. No postage. Hand-delivered. Inside, a single Polaroid of Aaliyah, bound to a chair in some concrete room, terror and defiance warring in her eyes. And a note in precise handwriting. The girl fights for us. One tournament, mother goes free. Marchetti interferes. Woman dies. Warehouse address to follow. Haley's knees hit the floor. The photograph clutched in her trembling hands. This was her fault. Every choice she'd made saving Luca, staying in his world, pushing him away when she needed him most, had led to this moment. Her mother, innocent in all of this, paying the price for Haley's decisions. She was still on the floor, cycling through desperate plans that all ended in blood when someone knocked. Not the aggressive pounding of threats, but a measured rhythm she'd memorized in late-night conversations and stolen mornings. Luca stood in her doorway, looking like he hadn't slept, holding an identical envelope. His dark eyes found hers, and every wall she'd built in 3 days of separation crumbled. You got one too, she whispered. Moretti delivered it personally to my office, with Marco standing behind him, smiling. Luca's voice was controlled, but fury simmered underneath. It's a trap. They want to humiliate me through you, or kill us both trying. I'm doing it. Haley stood on shaking legs, forcing steel into her voice. I'll fight their tournament, get my mother back. You're not doing this alone. She's my mother. My choice. Our life. He stepped into the apartment, closing the door behind him. Our fight. His hands came up to cup her face with devastating gentleness. I'm sorry for trying to control everything, for making you feel like a possession instead of a partner. You were right, I was protecting you like you were something fragile I'd collected, not someone strong enough to fight beside me. Haley's breath hitched, tears she'd been holding back for days finally breaking free. I can't lose her. I can't. You won't. His thumbs brushed away her tears. But please, let me stand beside you. Not in front of you, not behind you, beside you. As partners. It's a trap, she said, but her hands were already fisting in his shirt, holding on like he was the only solid thing in a tilting world. I know, which is why we're going to spring it on our terms. Luca pulled her closer, and Haley let herself have this moment of being held, being supported, before they walked into hell together. You fight, give them what they want. But my people will infiltrate the warehouse, create opportunities for extraction. Moretti wants a show? We'll give him one he'll never forget. Haley pulled back enough to meet his eyes. I'm terrified. Not of fighting I can fight, but of becoming that person again. The girl who broke bones for money, who turned violence into currency. What if I can't come back from it? You're not that scared 15-year-old anymore. His voice was absolutely certain. You're the woman who saved my life without hesitation when 7 trained killers had me cornered. You're the woman who sees economics problems I miss and calls me on my control issues and makes me believe I can be more than my father's legacy. He kissed her forehead with aching tenderness. You're not going back to who you were. You're moving forward as who you are, and I'll be there to remind you. Every step. They spent the next 3 hours planning with the precision of people who understood that one mistake would cost everything. Luca's people would pose as tournament spectators, workers, anyone who could get close. Haley would really fight, holding nothing back while they worked to locate and extract Aaliyah. It wasn't a perfect plan. It was desperate, dangerous, likely to go catastrophically wrong. It was also their only option. As dawn broke over Chicago, Haley stood at the window watching light paint the sky in shades of blood and gold, Luca's arms around her waist, both of them understanding they were about to walk into a trap that could destroy everything. Whatever happens, she said quietly, I need you to know leaving you was the stupidest thing I've ever done. His grip tightened. Then let's make sure we both survive this, so you can keep making better decisions. She turned in his arms, memorizing his face in the early light. Together? Together, he promised, and kissed her like it was both beginning and benediction, like they were sealing a pact that went deeper than words. They had 12 hours until the tournament, 12 hours to prepare for a fight that would determine whether they built a future together or lost everything trying. The warehouse smelled like rust and old blood, decades of violence soaked into concrete that would never come clean. Makeshift spotlights carved brutal circles from the darkness, illuminating a fighting cage that looked like it had been assembled from scrap metal and spite. The crowd was exactly what Haley expected. Criminals with dead eyes, gamblers clutching fistfuls of cash, people who came to watch violence the way others went to theater. Marco stood at the cage entrance wearing a promoter's smile that didn't reach his eyes. Ladies and gentlemen, the prodigy returns. 2 years away, but some skills you never forget. The Reaper, the crowd roared. Haley barely heard them. Her eyes tracked the warehouse's back corner where shadows moved. Guards posted outside a door that had to be where they held Aaliyah. Luca's people were scattered throughout the crowd, invisible in their ordinariness, waiting for her signal. She stepped into the cage and tried not to think about the last time she'd done this at 17, tried not to remember the girl who'd learned to turn violence into survival. The first opponent was young, hungry, fighting with the reckless aggression of someone trying to make a name. Haley moved through combinations her body remembered perfectly: sweep, mount, ground control, rear naked choke. He tapped after 90 seconds. She won, but his elbow had connected with her ribs hard enough to crack something, and blood trickled from her split lip. No rest. The second fighter entered immediately. A woman 10 years older with scar tissue mapping her face like history. This one was experienced, brutal, using Muay Thai strikes that made Haley's ears ring. They fought for 7 minutes that felt like hours, trading damage in the cramped cage while the crowd screamed for blood. Haley finally caught an arm, twisted into a kimura that made bone grind against ligament until her opponent tapped. She could barely stand. Blood in her mouth, ribs screaming, exhaustion making her limbs feel like lead. She looked at Marco through the cage mesh, saw his satisfaction, and understood with perfect clarity that this had always been designed to break her. One more, he announced. Then Mama goes free. Dante entered the cage like violence given human form, 6'4" of muscle and malice, the Moretti enforcer who'd ransacked her apartment, who'd made this personal. He smiled at her with teeth that had been filed sharp, and Haley felt something cold settle in her chest. This wasn't about winning anymore. This was about survival. They met in the center with collision force. Dante fought dirty eye gouges, groin strikes, moves that had no place even in underground fighting. Haley gave back as brutal as she got, every technique she'd learned in 2 years of basement wars, every desperate trick that kept you alive when rules didn't exist. He outweighed her by 80 pounds. He was fresh, while she could barely breathe. But she was fighting for her mother, and that made her dangerous in ways he couldn't calculate. His fist connected with her temple. The world tilted sideways. She tasted copper and darkness, consciousness flickering like a dying bulb. The crowd was roaring, or maybe that was just blood rushing in her ears. Dante's hands closed around her throat. Then, gunfire. Screaming. The warehouse erupted into chaos as Luca's people breached from 3 directions, weapons drawn, shouting commands that scattered the crowd like startled birds. Dante's grip loosened for one critical second. Haley drove her knee into his solar plexus, hooked his leg, took him down hard. Triangle choke legs around his neck, cutting off blood flow to his brain. He thrashed trying to power out, but she held on with everything left in her. Held on until his struggles weakened, until he went limp. She didn't let go. Not until strong hands pulled her away, until Luca's voice cut through the roaring in her ears. Haley, Haley, he's out. You won. She collapsed into his arms, barely conscious, and watched through blurred vision as his men kicked down the back room door. Aaliyah emerged frightened, roughed up, but alive. Their eyes met across the warehouse, and Haley saw her mother's expression shift from terror to something more complicated as she took in the scene. Her daughter barely standing, covered in blood, held up by the man Aaliyah had tried so hard to keep her from. Movement in her peripheral vision. Vincent Moretti, trying to slip toward the exit. Luca saw him too. He lowered Haley into one of his men's arms and stalked across the warehouse with lethal purpose, gun appearing in his hand like conjuring. You touched my family. Luca's voice was conversational, terrifying in its control. The shot echoed through the warehouse, Moretti screaming, clutching his kneecap. Next time I won't miss the important parts. Sirens wailed in the distance. Luca's people moved with practiced efficiency, extracting them through a back exit as police descended on the chaos. Haley found herself in the back of a Mercedes, Aaliyah on one side, Luca on the other, both of them holding pieces of her together as Chicago's lights blurred past the windows. I'm sorry, Aaliyah whispered, tears streaming down her face. I'm so sorry I made you ashamed of being strong. Haley couldn't answer, could only lean into her mother's shoulder, while Luca's hand found hers in the darkness, his grip steady and sure, anchoring her to something solid as the adrenaline finally crashed and darkness pulled her under. The private facility was more luxury hotel than hospital soft lighting, actual art on the walls, a level of discretion that came with cash payments and no questions asked. Haley drifted in and out of consciousness for the first day, pain medication blurring the edges of memory until she couldn't distinguish between the tournament and fever dreams. When she finally surfaced fully, Aaliyah was sitting beside her bed, holding her hand with the desperate grip of someone who'd almost lost everything. "Mom," Haley's voice came out raspy, damaged. "Don't talk. Just listen." Aaliyah's face was streaked with tears, exhaustion carved into every line. "I'm sorry. God, baby. I'm so sorry. I spent so long trying to give you a normal life that I made you ashamed of being extraordinary. Made you feel like your strength was something dirty, something to hide." Her voice broke. "You saved that man's life. You saved mine. And I treated it like a character flaw instead of the incredible thing it is. You just wanted better for me. I wanted safe for you. There's a difference." Aaliyah squeezed her hand. "But you've never been safe, have you? You've been strong. And I should have celebrated that instead of trying to bury it." The reconciliation wasn't dramatic, wasn't a single moment of catharsis. It was Aaliyah staying for 3 days straight, learning to see her daughter's complexity instead of just her fears for her. It was Haley explaining, really explaining what fighting had meant, what Luca meant, what she needed her mother to understand about the woman she'd become. Luca visited during the quiet hours, bringing updates that felt like watching dominoes fall in careful sequence. The Moretti family was dismantled from the inside, federal investigators discovering evidence of racketeering, money laundering, weapons trafficking. Vincent Moretti faced charges that would keep him imprisoned until his grandchildren were old. "Anonymous tips," Luca explained, with the slight smile of someone who understood irony. Marco was arrested for human trafficking, the underground fighting operation exposed. The videos he'd threatened Haley with were gone, erased by lawyers who billed in four-figure increments and asked no questions. "You handled everything," Haley said. And it wasn't quite accusation, but close enough that Luca heard it. "I handled what I could handle, so you could focus on healing." He sat in the chair Aaliyah had vacated, exhaustion evident in the shadows under his eyes. "But you're right. I default to control when I'm afraid. It's what I know." "Why are you afraid?" The vulnerability in his expression was devastating. "Because everyone I've ever failed to protect ended up dead. My mother, my younger sister, people depending on me who I couldn't save." His hands clenched. "And the thought of failing you, of you being hurt because I wasn't fast enough, smart enough, ruthless enough, it paralyzes me." Haley reached for his hand despite the ivy line pulling. "I'm not them. I'm not fragile. And you can't protect me from everything, Luca. Sometimes you just have to trust that I'm strong enough to stand beside you, not behind you." "I know." He brought her hand to his lips. "I'm learning. Slowly, but I'm learning." They spent her recovery building something new, a relationship based on honesty instead of protection. Boundaries emerged through difficult conversations. She would finish college, maintain independence, make her own choices. He would include her in decisions, ask instead of dictate, accept that partnership meant occasionally being wrong. It wasn't perfect. They fought about his instinct to solve her problems, about her reflexive need to prove she didn't need saving. But they fought as equals, and that made all the difference. The conversation with Aaliyah happened on Haley's 5th day in recovery, her mother arriving at Luca's estate with the determined expression of someone about to say difficult things. "She's still young," Aaliyah told Luca in his study, Haley beside him, refusing to be discussed like she wasn't present. 20 and 2 months, but still young, still figuring out who she is. "I know," Luca said simply. "You're 13 years older. You have power she doesn't, money, connections, a world she's still learning to navigate." "I know. So here's the deal." Aaliyah's voice was steel wrapped in maternal love. "You treat her right, you respect her choices, you never make her feel like she owes you something or you answer to me. I don't care who you are, what you control, how dangerous you think you are. You hurt my daughter, and you'll learn exactly where she got her strength from." Silence stretched thin. Then Luca smiled, genuine, surprised, respectful. "Yes, ma'am." It was the first time in a decade anyone had held him accountable without power over him. Without agenda, just a mother protecting her child. Something in his expression shifted, softened, like he'd been given a gift he hadn't known he was missing. Good. Aaliyah nodded once. Then I suppose you can keep dating her. But I'm watching. Later, alone in his study after Aaliyah left, Haley watched Lucas stare out the window at his estate. That was important, she said softly. Her accepting this. It was more than acceptance. His voice was quiet, wondering. It was family. Real family. Earned, not given. I've never had that. Haley moved to stand beside him, their reflection ghostly in the glass. You have it now. He turned to face her, cupping her face with hands that had held guns hours ago, and now held her like she was the most precious thing in his world. We build it together. Everything else, the danger, the complications, the impossibility of this, we face it together. Together, she agreed, and kissed him as Chicago's lights glittered below them, like promises they were still learning how to keep. The mortarboard felt ridiculous perched on Haley's head, the tassel swinging with each step as she crossed the stage to accept her economics degree. Summa cum laude. Full honors. Every late-night study session, every exam taken with bruised ribs healing, every moment of juggling college and Luca's world, all of it, culminating in this single piece of paper that represented everything her mother had sacrificed for. She found Aaliyah in the crowd immediately, her mother standing to applaud with tears streaming down her face, pride radiating from every inch of her. And in the very back, almost hidden in shadows, Luca, respecting that this moment belonged to her achievement, not their relationship. But his smile when their eyes met said everything that mattered. The celebration dinner was Luca's idea, and the location was his particular brand of irony. Giordano's, completely renovated under new management, the scene of that night now transformed into something else entirely. They sat at table 7 where Luca had been sitting when 7 men tried to kill him, where Haley's life had changed in 23 seconds of violence she couldn't take back. I have a gift, Luca said over dessert, sliding a folder across the table. Inside, architectural plans, legal documents, a check that made Haley's breath catch. Youth Center in South Loop. Your name on everything. Facilities for teaching self-defense, scholarship programs, mentorship, everything you told me you wanted to build someday. Luca. Her voice failed, overwhelmed. You wanted to help girls like you were. Now you can. His expression was soft, proud. You earned this. The degree, the opportunity, all of it. I'm just providing resources. She was 20 now, more certain of herself than the 19-year-old who'd stumbled into his world through an act of desperate courage. Their relationship had matured through the year, still complicated, still navigating the 13-year age gap and the impossible collision of their worlds. But real in ways that mattered. He'd learned to value partnership over control, to ask instead of dictate. She'd learned to accept support without feeling like she owed something in return. Not perfect, but honest. 3 years later, the Thompson Youth Center opened its doors on a crisp autumn morning. Haley stood in the main training room, state-of-the-art equipment, motivational quotes on walls she'd personally painted facing her first class of teenage girls. All backgrounds, all circumstances, united by the desire to learn that strength could be protection instead of violence. Is it true? A young black girl in the front row raised her hand. Were you really a fighter? Like underground and everything? Haley smiled, recognizing herself in that curiosity, that hunger to see someone who'd survived and transformed. I was. Started at 15, fought until 17, made a lot of mistakes, hurt people, got hurt, did things I'm not proud of. Do you regret it? I regret the circumstances that made it necessary. But the strength I learned, the ability to protect myself and others? She shook her head. That I'll never regret. I still fight. I just fight for different things now. Movement in the doorway. Luca, watching with the expression he wore when he looked at her building something meaningful. The engagement ring on her left hand, simple platinum, her choice after his proposal 6 months ago, caught the light. He'd asked properly this time, nervous and honest, giving her the power to choose their timing. She'd said yes immediately. The center's administrative office was run by Aaliyah, who discovered a talent for organization and community outreach, who'd found her own purpose in helping build what her daughter envisioned. Former enemies, people from Moretti's dissolved organization seeking legitimate work, now served as security and maintenance, given second chances the way Haley had been. After the opening ceremony, after the speeches and ribbon cutting and community celebration, Haley and Luca found themselves on the center's rooftop as sunset painted Chicago in shades of amber and rose. Who would have thought? Haley leaned against the railing, surveying everything they'd built, the waitress and the Mafia boss. Luca moved to stand beside her, his arms settling around her waist with the easy familiarity of years together. The woman who saved me, he corrected gently, and the man trying every day to be worthy of that gift. She turned in his arms, seeing not the dangerous crime boss who'd terrified Chicago's underworld, but the man who'd learned to trust partnership, who funded youth programs anonymously, who'd chosen transformation over his father's brutal legacy. We saved each other. We did. He kissed her forehead. And now we're saving others. Below them, teenage girls streamed out of the center laughing, stronger than when they'd entered, armed with knowledge that their bodies could be protection instead of vulnerability. Aaliyah locked up the administrative office, chatting with former criminals, now building legitimate futures. Community members lingered, grateful for resources they'd never had access to before. It wasn't a fairy tale. Fairy tales didn't include broken ribs and underground fighting, criminal empires and impossible age gaps, mothers who had to learn to accept their daughter's complexity. Fairy tales didn't acknowledge that love required work, that transformation was painful, that redemption was earned through daily choices rather than grand gestures. But it was better than a fairy tale. It was real, built on truth, respect, and the courage to choose light over darkness, partnership over possession, growth over comfortable stagnation, built by a woman who'd learned her strength wasn't something to hide, and a man who'd discovered that power meant nothing without someone worth sharing it with. As Chicago's lights began to glow against the darkening sky, Haley Thompson and Luca Marchetti stood together on the roof of something they'd created from violence and fear and impossible circumstances. A center, a family, a future. And there it is. From violence to redemption, from isolation to family. If this story moved you, if you believe people can transform, that love can grow in the darkest places, I want to hear from you. Comment below with your thoughts on Haley's journey. And subscribe to this channel because we're all about stories that prove second chances are real. Welcome to the family. And for the first time in either of their lives, they both believed it would last.